In the autumn of 1888, the largely impoverished Whitechapel and Spitalfields districts in the East End of London were to be found, by those unfortunate enough to reside in their slums, steeped in poverty and all manner of crime and degradation. Streets lit by gas lamps and dark, foggy back alleys offered scant protection to its residents. The streets themselves were filthy dirty, with the foul stench, resulting from poor sanitation, overwhelming the nostrils at times, and its pavements lined with the starved, impoverished inhabitants of the overpopulated and unforgiving capital. Infant mortality was rampant, prostitution rife, and housing barely habitable. With honest labor exceedingly hard to come by, it left a significant portion of the population both destitute and prone to all manner of depravity. The lucky residents found sweated labor in the tanning houses or textile factories. Workhouses were a dread alternative, offering insufficient rations and meager shelter to the destitute in return for strenuous and punitive activity. And, while certain enclaves within the Whitechapel and Spitalfields districts were relatively crime-free and law-abiding, there could be no denying that their slums were amongst the very worst the good old city had to offer. What little money its inhabitants had at their disposal was mostly squandered in the innumerable taverns and public houses that littered the area, alcohol being adopted as the coping mechanism of everyday life. Pubs proliferated in the East End, and drink was cheap, providing a viable and ready means of escapism for the multitude. Little surprise, then, that, as a result, crime ran rampant, petty crime being commonplace, alongside more serious violent disturbances that were, more often than not, fueled by alcohol. And, most recently, a further terror was being wrought by the shadowy figure of Jack the Ripper. Vulnerable women, forced to earn a living on its streets, had little choice but to persist in plying their trade and run the daily risk of falling foul of his deadly advances. Though it being 5 weeks since the last attack, the sense of panic had lessened somewhat, and greater risks were consequently being taken. The two gentlemen to whom I will now refer first appeared in that gloomy and overcast environment, as if they had each sprung fully formed out of the yellow fog that hung over the grimy cobbled streets in the early hours of Friday the 9th of November, 1888. Being equally remarkable for their differences as for their similarities, let me begin by describing Richard Manlove, a handsome, bespectacled gent, standing 5 feet 7 inches tall, and weighing 11 stone 5 pounds when naked. When dressed in his customary garb, he would appear the very model of a respectable Victorian man. But tonight he had dressed down, intentionally, and so looked and smelled as a humble Billingsgate fish porter might, in order to pass unremarked amidst the locals. He was more than adept at assuming a disguise. Born in Berlin, of Russian and English parentage, he earned his living on both sides of the Atlantic, on the stage as actor manager, and was currently thus engaged at the Queen's Theatre under the auspices of Sir Henry Turning and his intimate theatrical associate, Bram Stoker. Manlove was the very model of that modern brand of consummate thespian who felt it necessary not just to act a part, but to become his character. And, as he was currently employed as lead in the dual role of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, these districts offered him a rich, succulent vein of opportunity for his research, something he could really get his teeth into and draw inspiration from. He was not quite sure who he was looking for exactly, only that he would know when he saw them, as indeed he did, when, out of the swirling mist, stepped the towering figure of the second gentleman who is to concern us, a figure to whom Manlove immediately applied the epithet of Dark Master, for want of a sobriquet. Dressed in a cloak and top hat, this individual's opulent appearance was at odds with his surroundings, and naturally made him a notable presence in the neighborhood. Yet it was not unknown for well-to-do types to gravitate to centers of all manner of vice, such as this corner of London offered in abundance. The 10 Bells sat on the corner of Spitalfields Market. Behind its weathered facade, it was packed full of local drinkers, as on most nights of the week, it being a firm Shoreditch favourite. It was thence to which the gentleman gravitated, with Manlove fast on his trail. The interior was of its type and unremarkable. 2 small bars where customers stood up to drink, both decorated with ornate tiling, mahogany panelling, cut-glass mirrors, and brightly lit. The overall effect was slapdash, theatrical, and gay. The gentleman took his place at one end of the bar, Manlove at the other end, watching surreptitiously as the fellow ordered a drink. Once served, he did not touch it, but instead lit a long, thin cigar and puffed upon it. As both a gifted mimic and a quick student, Manlove made a mental record of his subject's every gesture so that he might appropriate them later. There was something strangely sensuous, even obscene, in the manner in which the dark master fondled and sucked on his cheroot, whilst gazing upon the unfortunates gathered around him, as if fully present, but unable to participate. Despite his deathly pallor, the form and outline of his countenance was beautiful to behold, and so, naturally, he attracted the attentions of the dollymops, who tried, and failed, to win his attentions and the contents of his purse. But even as they stood before him, though his darkly glistening eyes were apparently fixed on theirs, still it seemed he looked straight through them, as if he had no particular interest in the female sex. And, registering this, they quickly moved on. Manlove watched him intently from the corner of his eye, and oft-times in the reflection in the mirrored back wall of the bar, aware that, whilst he was quickly picking up the externals, the internal character lay masked, as if under a shroud. Forming an idea of the nature of the man struck him as nigh on impossible, so entirely self-absorbed and avoidant of contact did his subject appear, though it allowed Manlove's imagination license to perceive the dark master as something otherworldly, something supernatural. It was with that curious thought on his mind that Manlove again lifted his eyes to the mirror, only to meet the gentleman's gaze. He shuddered involuntarily and shrank a little. He had been discovered. The look in those eyes held reproach, but, more than this, a warning. He could not seem to drag his own eyes away, for there was something mesmeric in that stare. It felt as though the man's eyes pierced their way into his very soul, read his every thought, revealed his every secret. Then Manlove blinked. The gentleman appeared to have learned all he needed to know, and had looked away, and the spell was broken. Then the dark master passed down the bar to stand at his side, and leaned in close to his ear. As the gentleman whispered, Manlove felt his warm breath and the whiff of cigar smoke caress his cheek, and he cringed. "On some other occasion, I might have welcomed your attentions, but not tonight. Consider yourself fortunate." Abruptly the man cocked his head and appeared to sniff the air. "I am leaving now. Do not follow me. Not if you value your life." And with that, he stepped out of the door, leaving a blast of cold air in his wake. For some insane reason, he knew not why, Manlove felt compelled to rise and follow the dark master. Outside, through the fog, he thought he caught a glimpse of his quarry, pass before the frontage of the Britannia, and disappear along Dorset Street. But by the time he reached where the shadow had lain, there was neither sight nor sound of the pursuit. The chiming of the Spitalfields church clock accompanied him as he continued along Dorset Street, with no little sense of trepidation. The street was empty and eerily silent as he made his way through the mist by stealth, until he came upon a long, arched passageway that connected Dorset Street with Miller's Court, one which was illuminated by a gas lamp located almost directly opposite. He was startled then by a figure hurriedly emerging out of the alleyway. It was the figure of a respectably dressed young man in a black wide-awake hat and with a dark moustache, stout-looking and not very tall, but one making an obvious effort to disguise his features by lowering his head and pulling the broad brim of his hat over his eyes as he crossed in front of him. It was then that a great, black beast leapt out of an adjoining alleyway and pounced upon the stranger. It was a hound, an enormous spectral beast sent from hell, and its victim was no match for its size, power, and strength. Manlove would never be sure thereafter whether the stranger had not died of fright even before he was thrown to the ground. But no matter. As the beast's giant, slobbering fangs tore his throat to pieces, skin tearing, blood spurting in great torrents, death was inevitable. The demon dog now lapped its tongue against the gaping throat of his victim, before turning its darkly glittering eyes upon Manlove. Then, gripping the coat collar of his prey between his teeth, the beast dragged the body over the bloody cobbles and away into the darkness. Manlove turned and fled through the city streets, pursued by the conviction that all that is hideous and terrifying and unknown exists, convinced that all vile, bestial instincts, unless tamed and thwarted, must lead to imminent disaster. A half-hour later, and inside of his rented rooms, he felt the hand that fell heavily upon his shoulder, and found himself bundled into a dark, forbidding doorway. "I told you not to follow me," hissed the Dark Master. I, stuttered Manlove, frozen and transfixed, his back pressed up against the wall. Here in the dark he could see nothing but the whites of the Dark Master's eyes. "And what did you see?" "See? Nothing." The low laugh that met Manlove's protestations sounded more akin to a growl. "Saw nothing? Oh, but you saw something indeed. You saw Jack the Ripper finally getting his comeuppance." "The Ripper? Oh, it is true. I too am a monster. My own Dark Master saw to that. But I choose to feast on evildoers. Remember that." And with this, he gripped the back of Manlove's neck and pulled his face towards him, forcing his mouth upon Manlove's mouth. It was a cold, moist, loveless kiss, tinged with aggression, one that seemed to go on until, breaking away, the Dark Master released him, turned, and disappeared again into the shadows. Manlove found himself left with a strange metallic taste upon his lips. Touching them with his fingers, he found that they were wet and sticky. Rushing to view his fingertips under the nearest street lamp, he saw the cause. It was the congealed blood of the Ripper.